think there's a couple other lectures that I'm still trying to get up there. Okay, but make sure you sign in if there are any points that are going to be given for today's class. You only get those if you sign in under today's date, right? I haven't had a sign in previously. If you've got a last couple of days. If you have a problem with the sign-in sheet, see me after. I'm not going to handle that here in front of everybody. Okay. So these questions that you see in this file are on Canvas under practice, midterm, and final. Okay. And this is practice midterm question specific to Chapter 6, variable costing, Chapter 7, activity-based costing. Okay. Now, the first couple of questions are really just to remind ourselves of the contrast between activity-based costing and traditional costing when you have one plant-wide overhead rate, and that's something that we studied in Chapter 3. So I doubt I'll have questions like these two on the exam, but I want you to just be able to contrast to what we learned in Chapter 3 to what will be tested on Chapter 7. And then you have a department-wide overhead, so you can do an overhead rate by department. And then finally, you can do overhead rates by activity, and that's what we'll be looking at when we get to some of these later questions. Okay, but let's just look at these first few. X company estimates overhead cost for the year will be $2,900,000. So we'll put that in the numerator. Got to do this stupid thing still. Here we go. 2,900,000. Just picking that number up, and let me make that line a little thinner. Don't worry, I'm going to fix this on Friday. I just don't want to fix it, try and install the new software before the class in case it doesn't go through and then I can't use it during class, but I'll take care of that on Friday. Is that beeping me? Something trying to warn me of something? Okay. Okay, and so then you have that 2,900,000, and then they tell us for indirect labor, it's 2.9. For our factory utilities, it's 800,000. So we just take those two numbers, divide that by the driver, and in this case, they're saying that what? The driver is direct labor hours. So there's 80,000 direct labor hours. You divide that by the direct labor hours. You come up with one overall plant-wide overhead rate, and that's the traditional method of doing that. Okay, same thing with this next one. They basically are taking what? The same exact question. What did I do? Put the same question twice in here? Oh, no. Then they say what? There was 4 hours of direct labor, and so you would take the 4 hours times basically the predetermined overhead rate, and that's what you would apply to a given job, right? Way back in Chapter 3. Okay. Now, what this one is doing is showing you how you would do this if you came up with a department wide. So they have mixing, they have baking, two different departments, I guess, for this bread company, whatever. And if they ask the mixing department's overhead rate using direct labor hours, you simply take the overhead cost for that department, divided by whatever they told you the driver was for that department, direct labor hours, and that gives you the departmental overhead rate for, in this case, mixing. Okay, so just a couple of things that we had talked about traditional. You could do it by department, but what we're going to be focusing on in the exam and what we focused on in Chapter 7 was activity-based costing. Now we come with our overhead rates by activity, right? And if you look at this question, we have 3 activities. Activity 1, Activity 2, and Activity 3. I thought I heard somebody open that door behind me. Sorry, guys. I come from Hayward, and we hear sounds behind us. We turn around, and we look to see what it is. Okay, so we have what? Activity 1, Activity 2, Activity 3. And I think in the little example we went through in class, we had things like material handling, we had setup. These were activities. And what we're going to do is come up with a rate per activity. So to get a question like this right, it's kind of a little bit of a longer question because you have to do it for each activity, right, to get the answer right. So you go ahead and you pick up the cost. Let's just do activity 1. Okay, you pick up the cost for that activity, and then you go ahead and you're going to do what? You're going to divide it by the number um, of by the amount of activity. Okay, these are not the number of units. Don't get this confused on the number of units. This is whatever the amount of the activity is. So maybe we were talking about materials handling. These would be pounds, wouldn't they? Okay, these are not the number of units. These are pounds, right? If we were talking about changes, changeovers, it's the number of changes, right? It's not the number of units that we're producing. It's what? How much of the driver of the activity do they use? If it's material handling, for example, this would be pounds. So you add these up, 6,000 plus 9,000 plus 20,000 gives us a total of, thank you, 35,000 for that one. Okay. Now, if we want to allocate the cost here, then per this activity, we would take the 70,000 divided by what? 35,000. And for activity 1, it is what? $2 per whatever the driver is, huh? $2 and what? That shouldn't be right. That should be pretty much $2. Okay, you owe me 14 cents. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, then you go ahead. I thought that was funny. Never mind. Okay, so then what? Then you take what? You take this next one, 45,000, and you add them together. That gives me what? Somebody got that? 30,000. Okay, good. So we got 30,000 here now. We take that 30,000 and we divide that into the dollar amount, and it's what? $1.50 per unit of activity, whatever the activity is here. Okay, and then we do the same thing with this last activity. We add those together. That's 5,125, you say? Okay, and we take that, divide that into the dollar amount of 82,000, and it's $16 per activity. Whatever this activity is, materials handling, number of changes, whatever. It is not the number of units of product, right? It's whatever the activity is. Okay. Okay, good. Now we come up with that here, so answer D is the correct one. $2 for activity 1, $1.50 for activity 2, $16 for activity 3. Now you come over, and this next question is sort of the same same table anyway, but now they're asking us the cost that will be assigned to product B. So since it's what, $2 in the previous problem? $2 per activity, per unit of activity, materials handling, whatever. And since product B used what? 9,000 for this activity 1, then the cost assigned here is 18,000. Okay, $1.50 times the amount used for product B for activity 2 is 15,000 times 150 gives me 22,500. And I do the same thing for activity 3, $16 times the 1,000 units there gives me 16,000. So the answer is 56.5. So we came up with the rate per activity, didn't we? And allocated to the products accordingly. Question? I could give you this same question and just ask you product A, couldn't I? Give you the challenge of the century. Okay. Question? Okay, good. Let's take a look at this one. And this one is similar, different numbers, similar. 3 activities. I guess they only have 2 products on this one. Okay, and what this one ends up asking you is what is the per unit cost of product B. Okay, now this problem gets a little bit more involved, and that we're first going to have to figure out how much to allocate per activity to product B. And so I went ahead and did the math ahead of time on this one. We have the total amount of whatever pounds, whatever the driver is for the 3 activities. We put those what? In the numerator, the denominator here. Good job, John. That's the denominator, that 5,800. And then we go ahead and activity 1, product B used what? 2,800 of activity 1. We multiply that times 87,000, and so for activity 1, we're going to assign what? 42,000. Okay. Then we have 10,000. That's the base here in the denominator. And product B used what? 5,500 or whatever the driver of that activity was times 62,000. That gives me 34,100. And I do the same thing. 7750 is the denominator. Product B used 5250 times 63,000. Times 93,000, excuse me, is the cost for activity 3, and we assign 63,000 to activity B. We add those up. Total cost being assigned to activity B is 139,100, and if we are what? Planning to produce and sell 69,550 units of product B, the cost per product, cost per unit of product B is $2. Question? Okay, good. Number, what is it? Number 8 now? Okay. Okay, good. So this one, instead of calling them activity 1, 2, and 3, they actually went ahead and gave us, some question to make you hungry, right? Because we got ice cream sandwiches and dessert bars. And I'm glad that this question asked ice cream sandwiches because I like those better than dessert bars, okay? Now what happens? You sit here and you have this extrusion activity. I guess that's when they squeeze the ice cream out from that's when they put the cream and the ice together, okay, and it extrudes out, okay? So it's just squirting out the ice cream into the sandwiches, okay? And then we have these packing costs because they have to put some wrappers on them and stuff. So we've got 2 activities, right, that are necessary in the production of these 2 products, sandwiches and dessert bars. Now we're going to focus on sandwiches. So what do we want to do? We first have to figure out what? What is the total amount of driver for the two two activities, and we have what? We have production volume. Add those together, that's 5550 batches. There's 750 batches. Now they tell us that what? For the extrusion, it's the number of batches made. Okay, so if we want to figure out how much of the extrusion costs to allocate to ice cream sandwiches, we do what? We take the base of 750, that's driven by batches, so it's 750 batches, and ice cream sandwiches had what? 400 of those 750 batches, so for extrusion costs of 637,500, 340 goes to the sandwiches, right? Then we do the same thing for the packaging cost. That's the number of units, and so we have what? We have number of units 350 plus 200, total 550. The sandwiches used what? 350 of that? Okay, so we multiply the cost 44,000 by that fraction, and 28,000 of the packaging cost are attributable to the ice cream sandwiches. So you add those together, that gives me 368,000 of costs that are going to be assigned to the product ice cream sandwich. I could ask you this same question and ask you dessert bars, right? Okay. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and let's look at a couple of variable costing questions, variable versus absorption costing, okay? And this first question is really designed here to remind you of what the difference is between them. Okay, and the difference between variable costing and absorption costing is how we treat fixed manufacturing overhead, right? And the way we treat the fixed manufacturing overhead is we are going to do what? We are going to treat it as a expense for the period. We'll expense it, right? So what happens? If we have a situation where our inventory levels have gone up, absorption costing will have the higher net income. And remember, we had that one slide which really sort of summarizes everything from chapter 7. In fact, let me put that slide up. Let's see if I can find it real quick. I mean, chapter 6, the variable costing part. See if I can find that real quick, because that slide is a really kind of the definitive slide for this stuff. Where are we? We are class slides. Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is in here somewhere. Let's see. Probably wrong class. Let me do it this way. Since I have it organized on Canvas, let's get it off of Canvas, and that'll help you remember where it is. Thank you. Everybody sign in? Okay. Chapter 6. Okay, and the slide I'm looking for is this one. Okay, I'm not going to put it in slideshow mode. You can see it fine from here because I don't want to have to then exit out of my whatever you call the stupid thing, PowerPoint. Okay, so what happens? If our units produce are what? Are more than the units sold, our inventory levels increase, obviously, right? And if our inventory levels increase, what happens? Variable costing will expense our fixed manufacturing overhead costs, whereas absorption will what? Treat those as part of my inventory, right? For those items that increased in inventory. So those costs will stay on the balance sheet. They go straight to the income statement for variables, right? So our absorption will have a larger net income than variables when inventory levels do what? Increase, because those costs stay on the balance sheet, right? Until we sell the items. If our inventory levels do what? Decrease because we sold more units than we produced, now what? Now absorption releases those fixed manufacturing overhead and releases them to the income statement, whereas variables had already done that in a previous period, hadn't they? So under those scenarios, then what? Variable will have the larger net income because now absorption is putting fixed costs, which were already expense in a previous period under variables. They're doing it this period as part of our cost of goods sold because we sold this period. If there's no change, then what? Then the inventory level should be the inventory level will stay the same, and absorption and variables will both show the same net income. Okay, so this slide really is everything you need to know to be able to answer the questions from chapter 6 that are related to variables. We still have segment reporting stuff from chapter 6, but that was embedded in the other practice midterms that we've already gone through. Okay, so under variable costing, which of the following is not expensed in its entirety in the period in which it is incurred? And it is what? Variable manufacturing overhead is still included in the ending inventory, and it isn't taken out until we take the cost of goods sold, right? When we actually sell those items. So we still treat variable manufacturing overhead as a product cost, right? Whereas under with fixed manufacturing overhead, we do what? We expense it, right? Okay. All right. So you start to take a look at these questions here, starting with number 10. Huh? Right. The the meaning of the question is that if you're, let me see, find one of these questions. If you're sitting here, let's see, we had one of those, a couple of those where we had to do it by unit. Let me go ahead and okay, just going back to some of the questions that were in chapter 6. Okay, and if you're sitting here and you're trying to figure out your cost for absorption costing, your product cost for absorption, you take direct materials, direct labor, variable manufacturing overhead, and fixed manufacturing overhead to come up with your product cost, right? Per unit. That's absorption. If you're doing variables, then your product cost consists of only your variable cost. So it's weird. I didn't take my clicker out. Come on. Of course, I'm going to grab every one of these, but the one that's hooked up. Okay. There it is. Come on, what is all this? Okay, so that is what? That is variable. I mean, that is absorption. If we're doing variables and we're trying to come up with the product cost, what is this? Tell me this thing is going to mess with me now. Did I put it on pen? There we go. Okay, so if you're doing variables now, it's going to be what? It won't write on here. Try it this way. No, that won't work either. I don't know why. I've just come into this thing where I can't get these software to work anymore. Maybe it's where I'm trying to write it. It shows me the pen. Then when I try to write on it, oh, I know what the problem is. Okay, so if we're doing variables, I think I know what the problem is. No, I don't. Okay, I'm going to have to write it on the board. Okay, so if we're sitting here and we're doing variables, then variables is going to pick up the direct material of 42. It's going to pick up the direct labor of 33. It's going to pick up the variable manufacturing overhead of $5, but we do not pick up the fixed manufacturing overhead. Okay, so when we do, we get 2 plus 3 is 5, plus 5 is what? 10 plus 7, $80 per unit. Okay, so if we were to sit there and sell, and I'm going to say we're going to sell 100 units. Well, how many units do they produce? Yeah, it does. Right here. It says that they sold 6,800 units. So if I'm sitting here and I'm doing my cost of goods sold for absorption, it's going to be 98 times how many units? Cost of goods sold is 98 times how many units? 6,800. $98 times 6,800 equals what? $98 times 6,800 units equals 9,800 times. Huh? 6,000, 6,600, 400 is my cost of goods sold using what? Using absorption. If I'm using variables for my cost of goods sold, it's 6,800 units times what? Times $80 per unit. 6,800 times 80 is what? 544,000? Okay. So what's happened? I'm having a higher cost of goods sold under variables, but my fixed costs are going to be more under variables because I'm going to take all of those as fixed costs, right? Meanwhile, for those, some 300 units that I haven't sold, that's still sitting in ending inventory under absorption. Okay, so if I had an inventory level that increased, absorption is going to have a higher net income. Okay, now if the next period I go ahead and I do what? I sell more units, my inventory level goes down. Now for those 300 units where they were sitting there still in ending inventory, what happens? Absorption gets them into cost of goods sold, and variables already took them as a period expense. So I'll have a lower net income in that next period.
Yeah, I know that. I understand that part. The question answer is variable manufacturing overhead cost. That's the answer. I don't know why it's variable. Because variable seems like they vary based on production. Why is that incurred more but expense less?
Under variables costing, which of the following is not expense in its entirety in the period in which it's incurred? It's the variable manufacturing overhead cost because they're still sitting in ending inventory.
But that's fixed manufacturing overhead, not variable.
No, variable would be as well. Just look at that question I just showed you. There's still 300 units under both methods that the variable manufacturing costs are still sitting in ending inventory. What about those 300 units? Did I expense the cost of those 300 units?
But for variable costing, then variable
You're going to lose this argument. You know that, right? First, accept that.
Sure.
Okay. All right. I just want to make sure that you don't get that you can't see because you're trying to prove that this question's wrong. Okay. Okay. I just want to make sure. Okay, because when you look at this one, because I don't want that interfering with your ability to understand. When you look at this one, there's 300 units that we did not sell.
Sure.
Since we didn't sell them, can their variable manufacturing costs be included in the cost of goods sold? How many units did we produce? We produced 7,100 units. That means there's 300 units that the cost is still in ending inventory, isn't it? It didn't come out into cost of goods sold?
Yes.
Okay, so if you look at that question, it says which of the items is not expensed under variable costing, and maybe we need to look at the other items, but variable manufacturing overhead is still sitting what? In our ending inventory, right?
That's because you counted cost of goods sold. For variable costing, you do the contribution margin. If you do that part, then the 300 unit also has to include variable selling and
No,
distribution.
they're sitting in ending inventory still.
But that's for absorption costing.
That's under both methods. Explain to me how the variable manufacturing overhead costs got expense for the period under this scenario.
For
Where is it?
first to compute contribution margin,
Yeah.
then you do
Where?
42 plus 32 plus 5 plus where's the slide plus variable costing.
This is the variable costing product cost,
Product cost.
which does not include fixed manufacturing overhead.
I'm doing product cost.
Huh? That's right. And product cost is $80. $80 times the items I sold for my product goes into my cost of goods sold. Right? So that's getting expensed. But the variable manufacturing overhead, I haven't sold those items yet. Show me how it would get into net income. Go ahead. Where is it in net income? Because this is going to continue on under variables, and it's going to take my fixed selling and administrative and my fixed manufacturing overhead, right? So show me where in here the variable manufacturing overhead was expensed. I only took 6,800 units. Okay, now I'm going to pick up the fixed manufacturing overhead. I'm going to pick up the fixed selling and administrative costs, right? So show me where the variable manufacturing overhead got expensed here. Not for the, no, it's not. There's 300 units. Show me where those 300 units are getting expensed here. Okay, so if that's the case, then it is true under which of the following is not expensed in its entirety in the period in which it was incurred variable manufacturing overhead.
Yeah, but so if you look at this question, you don't look at the example you gave us. It didn't tell like they sold more than, they produced more than they sold, right? That's only exists because they produced more than they sold.
How does that make this question not right?
Because if they produce 68,000 and they also sold 68,000, there is no ending inventory.
So,
So which means they expensed all of them.
so, so what does that have to do with this question? Variable cost, which of the following is not expensed in the entirety in the period in which it is incurred? What do you want me to say? All the time, some of the time, only if inventory levels increase, only if inventory levels decrease? I mean, I don't have to go on with all that. That statement is true. Variable manufacturing overhead is not expensed entirely in the period in which it's incurred if we have a situation in which production was more than sales, right? But I don't have to say all that for this question to be right. I don't have to say all that in order for this question to be right. It's still right. Huh? Yeah, there's more to this than trying to get the questions right on the exam. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Now you take a look at Bella Inc. manufactured. It's a single product. Variable cost net operating income was 93,006. Okay, and I set these up pretty much the way the solution shows them, guys. You take the 93,006, and then you go ahead and they tell us that last year inventory decreased by 2,600 units. If inventory did what? It decreased. Now we have the fixed manufacturing overhead that was sitting in inventory is now what? Being released for those 2,600 items. Variables took it last period, didn't they? When the inventory levels increased. Okay, they already expensed the fixed manufacturing overhead. So you subtract the what? The decrease in inventory. I don't know what all this nonsense is up here. The decrease in inventory of 2,600 units times what? They tell us it was $1 per unit was the fixed manufacturing overhead. So that's easy. You just multiply that times $1. That gives me what? 2,600, which is subtracted off of my absorption because my what? Variables is going to have a higher net income since the inventory levels did what? Since they decreased right off of that slide. Okay. Okay, good. Let's take a look at this next one. And these start to become sort of deja vu here. Last year, Christian Corporation's variable costing net operating income was 63,400. Fixed manufacturing overhead costs released from inventory under absorption costing amounted to 10,700. So they don't tell me that the inventory levels decreased or increased here, but obviously the inventory levels did what? Decreased in order for what? Fixed manufacturing overhead to be released from inventory. And so I would subtract that from my variables to get my absorption, right? Okay. Number 12. Okay. Last year, Tinkleberg. Okay. We'll just call it, what's her name? What's that thing that flies around? Tinkerbell. Okay. Tinkerbell Corporation's variable net operating income variables was 52.4. So when I see that, I'm going to go ahead and set that up, 52.4, and then I'm just going to see what happened to my inventory levels. And inventory levels did what? Decreased by 1,400, and that means that the fixed manufacturing overhead that was sitting in inventory under absorption has now been released, right? From my balance sheet. And so I take the 1,400 times the $8 per unit. That's 1,400, and I have absorption costing net operating income is 41.2. Okay. So again, the questions that I'm going to ask you are basically, do you understand? Now, where'd that slide go? Do you understand this slide? Okay, if you understand what's going on there, you can keep track of, know what to do by this slide. Okay, which is if my units are going to increase, then absorption is going to hold those on the balance sheet, right? The fixed manufacturing overhead. Meanwhile, variables does what? Expenses it, doesn't it? Okay. If the inventory levels decrease, now what? Absorption's variables is still going to expense the fixed manufacturing overhead, right? But now what? Now additional costs for units that weren't produced this period are going to be released from the balance sheet and are going to treat it as cost of goods sold. So absorption will show a lower net income, right? And variables has a larger net income. Okay. Okay, good. Come over. Okay, oh, that's it. Okay. All right, questions from anything else, this or anything else? 30. 30 multiple choice questions. I think it would be safe to say, how many chapters are on the exam? 5? Oh yeah, we got chapter 8 too, didn't we? 5, 6, 7, 8. We did not get rid of 5. We're not doing 4B. What? 4B was FIFO for equivalent units. So chapter 5, 6, 7, 8, that's 4 chapters, 30 questions. Chapter 7, I'll probably give you like maybe 3 questions from chapter 7. So that leaves me, why don't I make it 4 questions from chapter 7? If it's 4 questions from chapter 7, well, I'm trying to get a number divisible by 3 here. So it's what? 3 questions, right? From chapter 7 gives me 27. And yeah, I think it's fair to say if you take 27 divided by 3, that's 9 per chapter for the others. So a little lighter in chapter 7, a lot lighter in chapter 7. 3 questions from chapter 7, 9 from the rest. 3 questions from chapter 7, 9 from the rest. 3 questions from chapter 7, 9 from the rest. 9 from chapter 8, 9 from chapter 5, 9 from chapter 6. Why is that confusing? Yeah, I'll try to get those up there today. I don't know. This software gets real slow sometimes, and I think I have time because I have to render it to a video first, and I think I have time to do it, and then I start it, and it takes forever, and then I got to go somewhere. And if I got to go somewhere, I lose my connection to the internet, and I have to start all over again. So I'll try to get them up there. I can only make the software work as fast as it works. It used to work faster. I don't know why it's so slow now. Question? Question? Oh, good question. No, I don't think I'll get into that. So, the questions will be more how they were in Chapter 8, where I asked you to do the budgeted cash collections, the budgeted cash disbursements, the budgeted labor, the budgeted materials. Um, well, let me back up. The budgeted cash receipts. And then to get to cash disbursements, remember we broke it into our direct materials. So materials disbursements, labor disbursements, and overhead disbursements. Okay, so that gave you the total disbursement. And then I'll probably give you some questions. Remember, there are those ones that say, okay, they just start out giving you the receipts and the disbursements, and then you have to figure out if there's going to have to be a borrowing or what the cash balance is going to be. Okay. But since we didn't spend a lot of time with that, I won't take you that next step. Okay. Now that you have all these numbers, give me a budgeted balance sheet, give me a budgeted income statement, or I guess you go the other way, income statement first. But we won't do that. Yeah. Good question. Question? No? Okay, guys. I will be here all day. I'm here all day. I mean, I'm probably not walking out of here till 8:30 tonight. So, if you have any questions, you can see me. Otherwise, I will see you on Monday. Bring the Scantron, right? Same Scantron that we used last time. Okay, guys.